In the corner of the underground garage, an area repurposed by the RPD in its final hours, George Hamilton searched through the scattered debris for anything useful. That was when he saw it. Pinned beneath the fallen clipboard was a hastily written note. Almost unreadable, but the handwriting struck him immediately. Peter Jenkins, his colleague and friend, had left it behind. The message was short. Peter was alive, at least when he had written it, and he needed help at the university. Within a few hours, George gathered a handful of survivors who still had strength to move. Moving as a small unit, they slipped out of the garage and into the streets. George led the way through the alleys and back roads he knew well from his years at the hospital, but familiar landmarks felt alien now, claimed by the dead. The university came into view just past dawn, its tall ivy-covered buildings looming like a mausoleum against the orange sky. The campus gates hung open, bent inward as though something had forced its way through. George felt the eyes of his fellow survivors on his back as they crossed the threshold. Whatever Peter had discovered here, whatever horror had driven him to leave that desperate message, waited inside. After searching for a while, they found Peter in one of the university's side halls. His body, unnaturally still, the dust around him undisturbed. The survivors approached cautiously, half expecting him to rise like so many others in the city now. But he didn't move, not even a twitch. When they rolled him over, the truth became sickeningly clear. A single gunshot wound marked the back of his skull. Whatever fate had taken him, it had come at the hands of the living, not the dead. Beside him lay a scattered collection of notes, loose papers, filled with chemical diagrams, fragmented observations. Joe recognized the handwriting instantly. Peter had been working until his last breath, ideas spilling faster than his hand could keep up. As the survivors shifted to the pages, a pattern emerged from the chaos. An antidote, a real one. He had named it Daylight, a serum designed to purge the T-virus from the body, restoring those infected before the transformation completed. The notes described it as painstakingly unstable, requiring a precise blend of 3 rare compounds. Hope flickered within the group. They spread out across the ruined university, moving through darkened halls lit only by emergency lamps and distant fires. Each survivor took a different direction, searching for the compounds Peter had listed. But while the survivors searched the university's shadow corridors, another battle had erupted just beyond the campus's grounds. A detachment of the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service had been deployed to the area, though the true mission seemed murky even to those carrying it out. Their orders were vague, objectives contradictory, and their enemy unimaginable. They found it near the science annex, a towering humanoid silhouette, its flesh pale and reinforced, its movements disturbingly precise. This was Thanatos, a prototype Tyrant emerged in secret by former Umbrella researcher Greg Mueller, the same man who had developed the Daylight antivirus. Thanatos had been designed to surpass all previous Tyrants, and now, freed of its restraints, it had turned the campus into a hunting ground. The Umbrella unit opened fire, but it made no difference. The creature swept through the mercenaries, shrugging off the rounds as though they were raindrops. It broke their limbs and split their armor, and any man who survived war zones fell screaming in seconds. Among the chaos, one operative remained calm, Nikolai Zinoviev. While his comrades died around him, Nikolai focused solely on his assignment. He aimed a specialized firearm, a device loaded with a projectile meant to pierce the Tyrant hide and extract blood into a sealed vacuum capsule. The shot hit the Tyrant, but the creature did not fall. Instead, it turned its blazing gaze towards Nikolai, forcing him to retreat before the Tyrant stormed back into the university. The ground team was obliterated. Deep within the building, surrounded by shattered equipment and flickering emergency lights, they devised the only plan that stood a chance. Lure the Tyrant beneath the damaged ceiling and use its exposed wiring to bring the creature to his knees. The plan worked, and the Tyrant collapsed. During the fall, a small metallic object clattered across the floor. The vacuum capsule Nikolai had fired earlier. Within that tube, secured and intact, was a vial of T-blood. It was the first of the 3 ingredients for Daylight. The hunt for the remaining Daylight components drove the survivors deeper into the veins of Raccoon City. Peter's nose pointed them towards the subway system, a sprawling labyrinth beneath the city that had become a cold, stagnant tomb since the outbreak. They followed the old maintenance passages and climbed towards the base of the emission tower. Higher and higher they ascended, until the structure's interior began to pulse with a low drone. A massive wasp colony had claimed the tower, filling its metal skeleton with nests of papery husks. Survivors moved with deliberate slowness, disturbing nothing they had to. Near the tower's top, secured inside a research container, abandoned by some earlier Umbrella team, they found what they were searching for: the V poison, already extracted. 2 ingredients down, 1 to go. But the final component was buried far deeper. To locate the P base, I sampled the unaltered progenitor virus, the primal ancestor from which the T virus had been engineered. It descended into the bowels of the city once more, this time beneath the university itself. Access tunnel gave way to a forgotten water processing facility, its machinery groaning under the strain of neglect and contaminated runoff. Here, the truth behind Umbrella's maintenance structure was revealed. Large containment tanks lined the walls, some shattered open, some still intact, all bearing the same label: Hunter, restricted bioorganism. Navigating the drowned corridors and rustic walkways, the survivors finally reached the secure Umbrella vault. Inside, preserved in its original cryogenic storage tube, was a P-base, the pure, unchanged progenitor virus that Peter needed to synthesize the antidote. With all 3 components collected, the survivors had only one task left: reach the lab, activate the synthesizer, and pray daylight would work. Because if it didn't, the end of Raccoon City was already written. The survivors gathered at the 3rd floor laboratory, the air thick with chemical vapors and low rhythmic hum of the synthesizer as it began processing the 3 components of daylight. Then the lights flickered. A second later, the entire laboratory plunged into darkness. The machine's hum died mid-cycle. The survivors spun towards a corridor at the sound of footsteps. Emerging from the shadows was a thin, pale man with wire-rimmed glasses. He introduced himself as Greg Mueller, the scientist who had once engineered both Thanatos and the daylight formula. Mueller spoke with an unnerving ease, recounting his work for Umbrella, his obsession with suppressing the T-virus. He spoke as though he were delivering a final lecture, confident that none of his listeners would live long enough to repeat it. He hinted almost proudly that he intended for the Tyrant to slaughter them. But before he could finish the thought, a gunshot cracked through the darkness. Mueller's body jerked violently, a spray of blood marking the wall behind him as he collapsed without a sound. It was Nikolai. His expression held no remorse. With a few practiced motions, he activated a device. A digital timer blinked to life. Explosives, planted throughout the building, were now armed. The university was seconds away from becoming a crater. If they wanted to live, they needed to run. Clutching the completed daylight sample, which the synthesizer had barely finished before the power cut, they fled the collapsing lab as the countdown etched behind them. They burst out into the courtyard just as the university behind them began to collapse inward. Columns of smoke curled into the night sky, illuminated by burning remains of the campus that had once been a place of learning and discovery. Above the chaos, a rescue copter, its rotors chopping through the smoke as the pilots searched for a safe landing. The survivors waved frantically, clutching the precious daylight sample that represented the first real hope they had. The aircraft dipped lower, then the ground trembled. Something massive pushed aside the flaming rubble, emerging from the heart of the destroyed university. The creature that had stepped into the courtyard was no longer the tyrant they had faced before. Whatever remained of Thanatos had been reshaped by the explosion, transformed by the instability of its own engineered biology. Now 12 feet tall, with exposed muscle bulging beneath his torn, mutated skin, it loomed over them as a super tyrant. The helicopter was forced to pull back as Thanatos R roared at the sky. The survivors had no choice but to make their final stand. Some fought with the last of their ammunition, dodging the tyrant's sweeping blows as they emptied magazines into his armored hide. Others sprinted across the courtyard towards an old, abandoned M8 Greyhound armored car. Inside they found a specialized shooter, a weapon clearly designed for precisely this kind of crisis. Loaded inside was a single injector round. Daylight. With a tyrant bearing down on them, they steadied the weapon, took aim and fired. The impulse shattered against the monster's body, injecting the antivirus directly into his bloodstream. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. The Thanatos convulsed. The daylight reacted violently with the creature's T-virus saturated blood, triggering a chain reaction. The super tyrant let out a distorted, dying roar before collapsing in itself, its flesh dissolving into a grotesque slurry. The helicopter descended once more, this time unchallenged. The The survivors climbed aboard, clutching the daylight sample. As the aircraft lifted away from the burning remains of the campus,